Let's bring in Dr. Scott Gottlieb. He is the former FDA commissioner. He's also a CNBC contributor, and he serves on the boards of both Pfizer and Illumina. And Dr. Gottlieb, this sounded very similar to what you were telling us yesterday on this show, the idea that we're going to get back to normal eventually, but it's going to be a new normal. What does that new normal look like?
Well, it really depends. I think that when you get through this summer, so we're likely to have the epidemic run through April and May, dissipate in June, July and August. Is going to be relatively, hopefully, quiet. And then when we get back to the fall, we're likely to have outbreaks again, and we're going to have a different toolbox to try to quell those outbreaks. It's unclear whether we're ever going to get to a point where there's not hundreds or maybe a few thousand cases a day. I think even through the summer, even when we get into July and August, you're still going to have cases every day. You're still going to have small outbreaks, but they'll be manageable. But the fall is a real risk. This is an epidemic. This is a virus that wants to become endemic, and it's going to probably infect the southern hemisphere and want to come back here. We're seeing a lot of improvement in the models right now, especially in the Northeast, the Pacific Northwest, and northern states. The Southeast is still a little suspect in parts of the Sun Belt, but there is clearly improvement, and the mitigation steps we're taking are clearly working. What we need to do is be able to transition now at some point in May to case-based interventions where we start to isolate and target individuals with the infection. And that's going to be a lot of work. We're going to be prepared to do it, hopefully, much better prepared to do it, but it's going to be hard.
The governor of Washington canceled school for the rest of this academic year. He's canceled it all the way through June. If social distancing is what's working, do you think our kids are going back to school in the fall?
Probably. I think we're going to try to open schools and residential colleges in the fall. I think what you're likely to see, though, is the potential for outbreaks that are going to close selected districts. But, we shouldn't get caught like this again. We should have in place a massive surveillance system. There's no reason we wouldn't have in place a very broad testing system. I'm putting out a detailed paper today with some other folks, including Mark McClellan, the former FDA commissioner who I work for, outlining what that system will look like. But I think that's obtainable. And then the question is, do we have one or two therapeutics? I think that we can have a drug that could be effective against this virus, and perhaps more than one, available by the fall. But what we need to do is figure out what drugs are likely to work the best, what drugs are we likely to have in time for the fall, and really focus on moving those products through development. That list is not very long. It's probably 5 or 6 drugs that are obtainable, that are likely to be robust enough to have a treatment effect that's really going to make a difference. We need to identify those drugs very carefully and then put everything we can, the resources we have behind those products to try to move them through.
Hey, doctor, I have a question, which is to actually, in this case, take your doctor hat off for a moment. We often talk to you about the health issues so that investors can try to make some decisions. But you're also an investor and a business person yourself. And one of the things that's happened over the past couple of days as we've gotten better news about the curve and maybe where things stand is that investors have obviously pushed the stock market up in large part because they have an expectation that things are going to get back to normal. You've talked about things being a new normal or a different normal. When you look at where things are in terms of how investors are looking at the market, do you think they're looking at it correctly? Do you think that they're including the kind of information you're talking about and expectations about what that new normal looks like and that kind of timeline?
Look, it really depends. I think if we have in place by August a very broad surveillance system for detecting outbreaks and isolating individual cases, which we should have, but someone needs to own that portfolio and drive it forward with the government at both the state and the federal level. And we get 1 or 2 therapeutics that are impactful. They don't need to be a cure and they don't need to be transformative. They just need to have an impact on this virus. If we have that toolbox, this becomes a manageable threat. If we don't have that toolbox, we're going to live life with this circulating in the background, and it's going to be a drag on certain activity. And I think we're looking at an 80% economy where just certain things don't come back. So it really depends. I think we'll get the technology, but we only have 4 months to do it, and we need to have a real concerted effort to pull this through. These are not going to be easy things to get in place in that kind of a time frame. But I think we'll get it.
But so when you look at the stock market right now and what's happened in terms of what investors are doing, do you say to yourself, this makes a lot of sense? Do you say it doesn't make sense? I don't understand why it's going up. Do you say it should be higher, it should be lower? You are in the business, too. That's why I wanted to ask you what your thoughts were quite directly.
Right. Well, look, I don't know what the right market level is relative to what we're experiencing from an economic standpoint. Clearly, this is painful, and a lot of people are out of work, and some of these jobs aren't going to come back so easily. I think the markets are reacting to the fact that the models are indicating that this is going to run its course, and it's showing a lot of improvement, that the policy steps we've taken are working. So if that's where the markets should be, that's the right level for the markets relative to that, then I think the markets are reacting appropriately. This is showing improvement. We've been talking about this for a while now. The models are looking better. I believe those models. I think certain states like Texas and Georgia are probably understated, but for most states, they are showing improvement. Now, I don't know if the markets are fully pricing in the fact that there is risk that this is going to be more protracted, that this becomes a pathogen that circulates in the background through the fall and the winter. We have large outbreaks. And you have to hearken back to the days of smallpox and polio and measles. When those circulated and there were sporadic outbreaks across the United States, it became a drag on certain activities. That is a possibility here. Now, you have to handicap that against the hopeful possibility that we get a drug and we get a surveillance system that dramatically mitigates that. But that's not 100%. If I was to handicap that, maybe 50-50, probably a little bit better than that because I'm optimistic. I think we will get a drug, but it's not 100%.
Hey, Dr. Gottlieb, I just want to ask you what you mentioned, Texas and Georgia. I saw some of the stuff you were tweeting yesterday that just said in those states and several other states, actually, that the hospitalizations, the percent of cases that had to be hospitalized is much higher than 10%, which looks like that is really the norm everywhere you're looking at research. And that suggests that in those states, you definitely have more cases that aren't being detected. Maybe testing is low in those areas. What does that mean for the rest of the country? If we are looking at New York potentially hitting the apex this week, if the rest of the country, if this is kind of rolling through and it's not under control, does that mean the entire country is going to have to continue to kind of stay at home and have these orders to stay home? Otherwise, you risk cross-contaminating across some of these state populations.
Yeah, not really, because a lot of the states that have these epidemics now are going to leave their stay-at-home orders in place, so they're going to be limiting travel. And I think travel is going to be slow to bounce back through the summer anyway. You're going to see different regions come out of this before others. You know, they'll be 2, maybe 3 weeks behind. And New York's going to probably start lifting some of their measures before the Southeast does, for example. Florida's a little bit behind New York, and so is Louisiana. With Texas and Georgia, they're both testing not enough. They're testing about 0.20% of their population, 0.20, and they're in the bottom 5%, 5 of all states, if you will, in terms of the amount of testing that they're doing. And they have a lot of hospitalizations, as you've noted. Hospitalizations are more reliable because people who get very sick from this do end up being hospitalized and get tested. So when you see a lot of hospitalizations, but not a lot of people testing positive in a state, it's an indication that they're under testing, and both those states are in that kind of a bucket right now. Louisiana also looks problematic. Florida does. The models that showed improvement yesterday, I think, maybe are understating both those states. But nonetheless, the national trend is clear. We are seeing improvement across the board in most states, with the exception of a handful that were late to put in place some mitigation steps and probably still aren't testing enough.